I never imagined my life would end up in a room full of smug faces, fake sympathy, and sharpened knives hidden behind manicured smiles. My husband, Thomas, had just been laid to rest 3 days earlier. 42 years of marriage, and in the end, I barely got a week to grieve before the vultures started circling. I wasn't naive. I knew our wealth made us targets. But I thought family would mean something. I thought loyalty still had a place at the table. I was wrong. The morning of the will reading, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at a woman I barely recognized. My once vibrant red hair had faded to an exhausted auburn. The skin around my eyes sagged a little deeper, not just from age, but from carrying the weight of a man's legacy. A marriage filled with both love and sacrifice. I adjusted the pearl necklace Thomas gave me on our 25th anniversary. He always said pearls were my armor, classic, strong, resilient. I needed that strength now more than ever. The lawyer's office was a cool, modern space that reeked of polished ambition. Glass walls, white marble floors, and the scent of bergamot from a too-expensive candle. I walked in alone, as I always had, quietly steady, while the rest of them were already gathered like a pack of coyotes waiting to feast. There was my son Eric, my only child. 38, handsome, charming, and for the last decade, completely lost in his wife's orbit. And there she was, her Danielle. My daughter-in-law, though she always acted like she was my replacement in waiting. Danielle had a smirk plastered on her flawless face, the kind only Botox and hubris could produce. Her manicure was sharp enough to stab, and from the way she crossed her legs, it was clear she thought she was already sitting on $77 million worth of power. "Nice to see you could make it, Linda," she said, brushing an invisible speck off her silk blouse. "We were starting to wonder if you'd forgotten the reading." I didn't respond. I just smiled, tight-lipped and practiced, and took a seat beside Eric, who couldn't even meet my eyes. He used to be my sweet boy. Now he was little more than a puppet with Danielle's hand up his spine. Across the room sat Thomas's younger brother, Alan, and his wife Margaret. They never liked me. Said I was just a schoolteacher when Thomas married me. They'd always expected him to marry someone with a family name that opened doors instead of one who clipped coupons and packed his lunch. The lawyer, Mr. Kent, entered last. He was a tall, bespectacled man in his 60s, with a voice like gravel dipped in honey. He carried a stack of papers and a slight smirk that gave nothing away, until it did. "Thank you all for coming," he said, sitting down and adjusting his glasses. "This won't take long, though I expect it may be illuminating." Danielle leaned in, almost trembling with anticipation. I knew she thought this was her coronation. She'd spent the last few years whispering poison into Eric's ear, pushing Thomas into retirement, trying to wedge herself into every corner of our financial empire. Thomas had played along, or so she thought. Mr. Kent began reading. The usual legal jargon about debts, holdings, and trusts. Then he paused, looked up at me, and smiled. "And now, to the personal designations of Thomas Allen Whitmore's estate, totaling $77 million in real estate, stocks, and liquid assets." Danielle straightened in her seat, practically preening. Mr. Kent continued. "To my beloved wife Linda, who stood by me not just in prosperity but also in storms, who taught me what legacy truly means. Every cent of my personal assets, all of it, goes to her." The room fell into a stunned silence. Danielle's jaw twitched. Mr. Kent raised a brow and went on, "I know this may come as a shock to some of you, especially those who assumed their manipulation went unnoticed. But to be clear, Eric and Danielle are well provided for in the trust one set up a decade ago. That trust remains unchanged, $250,000 annually, disbursed at my wife's discretion." Danielle gasped, and I swear if her eyes could shoot daggers, I'd have been a corpse on the floor. "You've got to be kidding me," she shrieked. "All of it? To her? She hasn't worked a day in her life." I turned to her slowly. "Danielle," I said calmly, I worked every single day to keep this family from falling apart, especially from people like you. Mr. Kent cleared his throat. There's more. Danielle's eyes narrowed. Mr. Kent flipped the page. Thomas's final request was that any objections made during this reading would immediately result in the full forfeiture of the objector's access to the trust. He wanted peace in his passing, not litigation. Silence. Danielle shrank back like a dog that had been hit with a rolled-up newspaper. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Thomas had done the gloating for me, quietly from the grave, with the precision of a man who'd spent a lifetime watching and waiting. When we left the lawyer's office, Danielle didn't speak to me or Eric. She stormed out first, her heels clicking like gunfire across the marble floor, her face a mask of rage and disbelief. Eric mumbled something half-hearted, but I didn't catch it. Or maybe I didn't care to. I stood outside on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the sun hit my face. The city buzzed around me, indifferent to my storm. It struck me how strange it was that the world kept turning even when yours felt like it had been cracked in half. But mine hadn't cracked. Not really. If anything, I felt lighter. 42 years of marriage isn't easy to summarize. There were times I loved Thomas so much it scared me, and there were times I thought I hated him. But we built a life. Together. Not just wealth but substance. Stability. And despite the power games and long silences in the final years, I never stopped being the one who truly knew him. I'd seen the way Danielle slinked into his good graces, the late-night phone calls she tried to keep secret, the way Eric became more and more like her, less and less like the boy I raised. I bit my tongue through dinners that felt like negotiations and holidays that became performances. But Thomas? He saw it too. He wasn't the fool she thought he was. And he left me his final move, his last act of trust. The next day Danielle called me. I shouldn't have picked up. But I did. You smug bitch, she hissed before I could even say hello. You think this is some kind of victory lap? You think you've won. I stayed silent. Enjoy it while you can, she spat. Eric is done with you. You'll die alone in that dusty old house, and we'll see how long you last with no one left to cling to. I took a breath. Funny, I said softly. You sound nervous. That stopped her cold. Because if you really believed you had any power, I continued, you wouldn't be calling me at 7:13 in the morning like a woman whose world just slipped through her perfectly manicured fingers. Silence. I hung up. I knew then this was just the beginning. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal calls, estate transitions, and awkward conversations. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly had a lot to say. Old friends became new advisors. Strangers offered their condolences with hidden agendas. But beneath it all there was a shift in me. For decades I had been Thomas's wife, a role I took seriously. I supported his business, raised our son, hosted fundraisers, held my tongue, and maintained appearances. Now I was Linda Whitmore. No more, no less. And I had $77 million and no one left to please. I began sorting through Thomas's things. Some I boxed up for donation. Some I kept, like the fountain pen he wrote all his notes with, and the weathered copy of Moby Dick he always claimed he'd finish one day. He never did. In the back of his closet, I found a safe I didn't know existed. It took 3 tries and 1 locksmith to open it. Inside were 2 things. A letter. A flash drive. The letter was in Thomas's handwriting, shaky but deliberate. Linda, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I know what Danielle's done. What Eric's become. I saw it. I didn't stop it in time, but I'm trying to make up for it now. The flash drive will explain everything. Use it wisely. My hands shook as I plugged the drive into my laptop. It was filled with documents, screenshots, and audio files. Bank transfers. Emails. Hidden accounts. Private conversations Danielle had recorded on her own phone, carelessly uploaded to a cloud Thomas had accessed. She wasn't just manipulative. She was criminal. She'd been siphoning money through a consulting business registered in Eric's name, using shell companies to hide it. Over $2.3 million had quietly vanished from the family business until Thomas caught it. And instead of confronting her, he watched, collected, waited. The last file was a video. It was Thomas. He sat at his desk, looking old and tired but determined. I loved you, Linda. I never said it enough. I let this house grow cold, let that woman get close. I thought Eric would see her for what she was. He didn't. Maybe he never will. But you always knew. And you never stooped to her level. That's the kind of strength I didn't have. He sighed, looked down, then up again. This money? It's not just an inheritance. It's a weapon. Use it to protect what matters. And if Eric ever wants to come back from the dark, give him that chance. But don't let her back in. Ever. I watched that video 3 times. I didn't cry. But I did feel something finally unfreeze inside me. The next weekend I invited Eric to lunch. Just him. He came reluctantly, and I could see the tension in his face. He didn't hug me when he arrived. Just sat at the table like he was doing penance. I poured him a glass of wine, served the roast he loved as a child, and for 30 minutes we talked about nothing. Weather, his work, the headlines. Then I said, I know what Danielle did. He didn't respond right away. I have proof, I said. I'm not going to the police. Not yet. But I need to know. Do you even want to come back from this? He looked up, and for the first time in years, I saw the little boy who used to run through this very kitchen barefoot with grass stains on his knees. She said you hated me, he said quietly. That you thought I was weak. That Dad never trusted me. She lied, I said. But you let her. He nodded, shame spreading across his face like ink. I slid the flash drive across the table. You need to decide, I said, who you're going to be from now on. He didn't take it right away. But 2 days later he filed for divorce. Danielle didn't take the divorce quietly. The moment Eric filed, she went nuclear. She froze their shared accounts, threatened to go public with fabricated claims about me. She posted a photo of herself online, crying, playing the part of the betrayed wife, spinning a story about how I'd manipulated Thomas and now was brainwashing Eric. Her caption was simple. The money changed everything. It even took my husband. The comments flooded in. Supporters, haters, trolls. The media even sniffed around. Thomas's death had made a few headlines when it happened. He wasn't a household name, but he was powerful enough in the finance world to earn a few paragraphs in Forbes and a somber quote in the Wall Street Journal. Now they wanted a scandal, and Danielle was happy to sell them one. But I didn't flinch. Let her post. Let her scream. I had something stronger than noise. I had the truth. I hired a forensic accountant to back up every document on the flash drive, sealed it into a legal portfolio, and handed it to my attorney. Just in case, I told him. I'm not starting a war, but I won't walk away from one either. He raised an eyebrow and said, You know, Mrs. Whitmore, most people in your position would just disappear to Tuscany or Palm Beach. Why not let this die down? I smiled. Because I've been silent for 40 years. I'm done disappearing. The following Sunday, I went to church for the first time since the funeral. Not out of obligation, but because I needed to sit in a place that reminded me of who I used to be before wealth twisted our family into something cold and political. I was halfway through the service when I saw her. Danielle. 2 pews ahead. Wearing all black. Alone. I froze. She didn't turn. Didn't look back. Just sat there like a shadow. Was she following me? Was this some attempt to reclaim control? After the final hymn, she stood and turned, her eyes locking on mine. She smiled. Not smug. Not defiant. Something else. Something desperate. The next day a letter arrived. Handwritten. Linda, you win. I know you think this is justice. And maybe it is. But you don't know everything. You never did. Thomas wasn't perfect. He had secrets you didn't want to see. If you're smart, you'll stop digging. I read it twice. I wanted to throw it away, but something in the phrasing stuck in my mind. Secrets you didn't want to see. What did that mean? I went back into Thomas's study. His filing cabinets, his journals. I'd combed through most of them after he passed, but now I started again, slower this time. Looking not for what was there, but for what had been left out. And finally I found it. A locked drawer, deep in the back of the desk. I'd missed it before. The key was taped under the top drawer. He'd always been old school like that. Inside was a stack of envelopes. Old. Yellowing. Addressed to someone named Marisol J. And beneath them, photos. A woman. Younger than me. Latings. Smiling with a little girl who couldn't have been older than 8. On the back of one photo. Puerto Vallarta 2006. M&L. M&L? The girl looked eerily like Thomas. The same nose. The same crooked smile. And then I knew. Thomas had another child. I sat there for a long time just staring at the photo. My stomach twisted. Not in betrayal but in something harder to name. Grief maybe. Not for what he did but for what he never told me. Did he plan to? Did he regret it? Did he leave them anything? I called Mr. Kent, our lawyer. Check the offshore accounts, I told him. And searched the name Marisol J. Puerto Vallarta 2006. A week later he called me back. Yes, there's a transfer, he said. $50,000 a year. For the past 17 years. To an account in Mexico under the name Marisol Jimenez. Set up by Thomas. Quiet. Legal. And the girl? I asked. Her name's Lucia. She's 27 now. Went to law school in Guadalajara. Thomas paid for all of it. No mention of her in the official estate. This was completely separate. I hung up and stared at the window for a long time. This man I'd loved, this man who left me everything, had kept a child from me. Another life. A whole different version of himself. And yet, he hadn't abandoned them. He'd provided. Discreetly. Quietly. That counted for something. I wrote Lucia a letter. It took her 3 weeks to respond. When she did, it was formal. Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for reaching out. I never knew what kind of woman you were. I assumed you hated us. I assumed you didn't know about us. Now I understand it was more complicated than that. My mother passed last year. I've moved on. But I'd be open to meeting you once. To talk. To clear the air. Lucia. I flew to San Diego and met her at a small cafe near the harbor. She looked just like Thomas. It made my chest ache. She was poised. Calm. Brilliant. And when she smiled at me for the first time, something in me softened. We talked for 2 hours. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't offer excuses. I just told her the truth. That Thomas had left me with a legacy. And that legacy included her. Lucia and I kept writing. After our first meeting we exchanged letters, not emails, not texts. Real paper and ink. It felt old-fashioned, yes, but personal in a way that mirrored what Thomas must have done with her mother. I didn't try to insert myself into her life. I just let her know I was there. And maybe more importantly, I wanted her to know that she mattered. That she was seen now. No more secrets. Eric didn't know about her yet. I wasn't ready to tell him. Not because I feared his reaction, but because I wanted him to reach a certain clarity on his own before I handed him another truth that might knock him sideways. He was trying. I could tell. After the divorce was finalized, he came around more often. Brought groceries. Helped fix things around the house. We even laughed sometimes. But there was still shame in his eyes. Still a sense of loss. Not just for Danielle, but for the man he thought he was. One night over tea I finally said it. She controlled you, Eric. But you let her. And that's the part you'll have to face if you ever want to be whole again. He didn't flinch. Just nodded. I know. Then he surprised me. She hated you, Mom. From the start. Not because of anything you did. But because you never needed her approval. You were too calm. Too collected. That scared her. I stared at him, stunned. She wanted to destroy that calm, he said. And for a while she did. It was 3 months after the divorce when the final blow came. Danielle filed a civil suit. Undue influence, she claimed. That I had manipulated a dying man into rewriting his will. That I had used emotional coercion to cut her and Eric out. She had hired a very public, very media-hungry attorney who specialized in gold digger reversal cases. Cases where mistresses and second wives tried to grab power. But I wasn't a mistress. I was the wife. The woman who'd stood by Thomas's side while she was still in braces. And I had evidence. The will had been witnessed, videotaped, notarized, and reconfirmed twice in the 6 months before Thomas died. The lawyers had emails, memos, audio. It wasn't just ironclad. It was airtight. Still, Danielle tried to spin it in the press. Headlines surfaced. Millionaire widow accused of cutting out family. Son betrayed as stepmom grabs fortune. From housewife to heiress. The Linda Whitmore controversy. I stayed silent. Let the story play out. My lawyer told me, you don't have to do this. You don't have to counter. We'll win. Easily. But I was tired of silence. So I released one statement. Just one. It read, my husband of 42 years died knowing who truly stood beside him. Not for money but for life. Anyone who doubts that can read the final letter he left me. Or speak to the forensic accountant. Or review the court-verified testimony. As for Danielle, she underestimated a quiet woman. That was her first mistake. And her last. Linda Whitmore. The internet exploded. Twitter or X, whatever they call it now, took my side in full force. TikTok created fan cams of me in black dresses walking out of the courthouse. Women called me the quiet widow queen. One podcast even did a full investigative deep dive titled, Danielle Didn't Win, because Linda didn't flinch. It was surreal and strangely satisfying. 3 weeks later, Danielle dropped the case. But not before attempting one final act of sabotage. It came in the form of a video, leaked online anonymously but clearly orchestrated by her. It showed Thomas in a hospital bed, weak, struggling to speak. Danielle was off camera asking him leading questions. Do you trust Linda? Are you afraid of what she'll do after you die? Do you want someone else to help handle your money? He answered with confusion, fatigue, slurred words. But the public didn't see nuance. They saw an old man scared. Until my legal team released the full footage. Same room. Same day. 20 minutes earlier. Thomas, clearer, looked into the camera and said, Linda is the only person I trust with all of it. She's earned every cent. Not because of what she'll do with the money, but because of what she never asked for while I was alive. The internet turned on Danielle with a vengeance. Her brand deals dropped her. Her fitness business imploded. She vanished. And in the quiet aftermath, I finally sat on my porch, glass of wine in hand, and let myself feel finished. Not triumphant. Not smug. Just done. The war was over. Eric came over a week later with 2 envelopes. The first was a handwritten apology. I let her turn me into someone I don't recognize, it read. But I want to remember who I was before all this. If you'll help me. The second envelope? It was a letter from Lucia. To him. She'd reached out. Told him who she was. And that she didn't want money. Just honesty. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. I didn't know. I didn't either, I said. But we do now. 1 year later. Lucia flew in from Mexico for the first time. We had dinner as a family, me, Eric, and her. No tension. No pretense. Just stories and laughter and one shared understanding. That the past was messy, but the future didn't have to be. I had made a decision months before. I amended my will. Lucia would receive 1/3 of the estate. Eric another third. The final third would go to a foundation in Thomas's name, one dedicated to financial literacy programs for underprivileged teens. Felt right. Because legacy isn't about who inherits your money. It's about who carries your truth forward. Sometimes when I walk the halls of the house Thomas and I built, I still feel echoes of our old life. His laugh. Our fights. That Christmas when the tree caught fire. The garden we let go wild the year Eric left for college. But now it's peaceful. Now I know who I am. Not just Thomas's wife. Not just a wealthy widow. I am Linda Whitmore. I outlasted betrayal, greed, and silence. And in the end, I didn't just survive. I inherited myself. The house is quieter now. Not empty, just calm like a lake after a storm. There's music in the mornings. Birdsong. Sometimes classical, sometimes jazz. I let the light in through the windows, pour myself coffee, and walk barefoot through the same kitchen I once stood in feeling invisible. Now, I take up space without apology. Eric visits often. He remarried 2 years ago, to a kind, down-to-earth woman named Nina. She has a laugh like rain and a toddler son named Matthew who calls me Nana Lynn. The first time he said it, I had to excuse myself to cry in the pantry. Eric changed. Deeply. Slowly. He got therapy. Found faith again. Went back to teaching part-time at the community college. I finally realized I didn't want to be powerful, he told me one day. I just wanted to be useful. Lucia comes up from San Diego every few months. She never asked for more than I offered. She sends me books. Introduced me to spicy dark chocolate. She's sharp, opinionated, and doesn't let me get away with anything. You may be rich, but I'm still the better debater, she teases. We have our traditions now. Tamale making at Christmas. A girls' trip in spring. A framed photo of her mother now sits in my living room beside one of Thomas and me. She earned that space. Not by blood but by truth. The foundation we built in Thomas's name has sent over 1,200 kids through college prep financial programs. We have one office. One director. No flashy gala events. Just results. Sometimes I wonder what Thomas would say if he could see us all now. Would he be proud? Would he be ashamed? I think he'd be relieved. That the mess he left behind didn't stay a mess forever. That the women in his life, his wife, his daughter-in-law, refused to let pain become our final story. Last week I walked into the reading room of the local library and saw a girl, maybe 15, curled up with a book on estate law. She looked up as I passed and said, "Are you Mrs. Whitmore? From the Whitmore Fund." I smiled and nodded. My mom said your program helped her start her first bank account. She always says, because of that woman, I finally knew where to begin. I left the library with tears behind my sunglasses. Because all those years I spent wondering if I mattered. If the quiet work of loving, enduring, waiting meant anything at all. In that moment I knew. It did. Not everyone gets a second chance to write their story. But I did. And I filled every blank page with honesty, steel, and grace. I am not who I used to be. I am who I chose to become. And that is the real inheritance.